What's going on, Packer fans? Welcome into an all-new episode of the Pack a Day podcast. I'm your host, Andy Herman. You can follow me on Twitter at Andy Herman NFL. I'm joined once again by the NFC North expert for Fox Sports. You can follow her on social media at Carmen V. She's a member of the Pro Football Writers Association. Carmen Vitali, welcome back to the Pack a Day podcast. How the heck have you been?
Good. It's been a hectic week already because covering the NFC North, they were the most active division at the trade deadline. So all but one of the trades on Tuesday had to do with the NFC North. So that was fun.
Yeah, a lot of people were upset with me because a little bit before the deadline, like maybe 15 minutes before the deadline, I tweeted, "Oh, every NFC North team except the Packers made a move at the deadline," and then
I saw that. And then
Rasul Douglas right after. So that's my fault. That's on me if you are upset with the Rasul Douglas trade. I jinxed it into existence, I guess. But I actually wanted to start not with the Packers today. I wanted to start with the Chicago Bears because I know you were on video over on Fox Sports talking about the Montez Sweat trade, and I know you've been talking about it quite a bit. But it's an interesting trade for Chicago, trading for Montez Sweat. This is not your traditional team that would be like taking an all-in approach, like maybe the 49ers getting Chase Young to going and getting a Montez Sweat. This is the second year in a row that they have done this. Last year, trading for Chase Claypool, which has aged like some very bad Wisconsin milk. But they now go and get Montez Sweat, clearly a very good football player in Montez Sweat. The timing is interesting. The team that's trading for him is interesting. The fact that they did it in back-to-back years after having such bad success with it a year ago with Chase Claypool is interesting. The fact that they might have just been able to get him in free agency is interesting. The fact that his teammate Chase Young went for less to the San Francisco 49ers is interesting, but I will stop taking all of your talking points and let you discuss whatever you want to discuss about this trade.
The point, I was surprised with anybody to see the Bears be buyers, and especially I got to give them credit though for not being gun shy after what happened with Chase Claypool. I do think that the high second round pick was a little rich, but essentially this was done as an opportunity to get Montez Sweat at market value. This was a way for them to not have to overpay for a pass rusher. Chicago is not the best of free agent destinations, especially in its current state. You don't have Hall of Famers on the roster that can woo free agents. You don't have a warm and sunny climate. You do have state income tax. All of those things that free agents take into account. You can win over a guy if you pay him more, but this was an opportunity for Chicago Bears to get an elite pass rusher and negotiate with him for the long term and get him signed to a deal that was more along market value. That being said, Montez Sweat comes in. I think the press conference was one of his first stops after arriving in Chicago. And his immediate thought wasn't, I want to sign here long term. It was, I need to kind of get the lay of the land. I need to evaluate everything about this situation before I'm ready to commit to the long term to Chicago, which wasn't what you wanted to hear as a Chicago Bears fan. I'm sure the front office didn't want to hear that, at least publicly. I have to think that they had some inkling that this would be the case. That being said, General Manager Ryan Poles does have confidence that they are going to be able to sign Montez Sweat to a long-term deal. But that's the only way that this makes sense. Even if you have to use the franchise tag on him, I still think that's kind of a loss because you already gave up a high second-round pick. So now you have to use the franchise tag, which you might have to use on Jaylen Johnson now. So you can't invest anything more into Montez Sweat to get him to stay in Chicago as far as I'm concerned. It's a very interesting situation. Like I said, I applaud the Chicago Bears for not being gun shy, not letting what happened with Chase Claypool stop them from making a really good ad that's going to benefit their football team. But I'm still very cautious and trepidatious about Montez Sweat joining the Chicago Bears if it's not only for 9 games at this point.
Yeah, as a long-time pretend NFL general manager, there are 2 things that always that I think about in these sort of situations. One is trading for a player when you do not have that contract ironed out ahead of time just gives the agent and the player so much power in that negotiation because you just traded away a high second-round pick, and the egg on your face as a front office and as a GM that you have, if now you have to, like you said, use the franchise tag on him, or if for somehow, some way that guy gets let out the door, I mean, man, that is just a nightmare scenario, and you can't let that happen. So, like, the agent knows that. They're not they know how to get every, penny squeezed out of everything. They're going to know that, hey, you got to sign this guy to a big deal now, or you look like idiots. And this is a team that just looked like idiots for trading for Chase Claypool and then having to basically give him away for a 6th-round pick. Man, that if I was that agent, I would be, skipping in the street right now, knowing that, all right, we're going to be able to milk this. And the very first thing I would have said to Montez Sweat is like, don't make any overarching statements of like, right. Oh yeah, you're so happy to be it. And what does he do right away? Like you said, because I was like, well, we're going to have to see how this goes. We're going to have to take the lay of the land. And like, man, like again, his agent just has to be so happy with this situation. I'm just always trepidatious of like those sort of situations. If you don't have that deal completely ironclad and done in advance, which is always hard to do at the trade deadline, but still, then maybe you have to rethink the deal. The other thing that I always think of, and I think all of your points are 1,000,000% spot on, and on the surface, without all of those other things that we just discussed, I think getting Montez Sweat for a 2nd-round pick and, making him a long-term Chicago Bear, one of their, the team desperately in need of pass rushers, that all passes the smell test. Just in general, though, kind of like a rule of thumb is everything's a transaction in a way. And I do wonder, like, is it better to have Montez Sweat, or is it better to have a 2nd-round pick and all that money that you're about to give Montez Sweat to go out and sign a big time, maybe it's not an edge rusher, but to sign a big time, free agent for a team like Chicago, who's not like one player away? I kind of like the 2nd-round pick and all the money to go out and spend in free agency more than just everything wrapped into Montez Sweat, who has played already for a handful of years. And again, now you have to give him this big contract. So those are the things that always just like, it makes me a little, nervous for teams that do those type of trades.
Yeah, as of right now, you're putting it seems like the Bears are putting a lot of their eggs in one basket in Montez Sweat. And while I believe that Montez Sweat is an incredibly elite pass rusher and he's a very productive player, he's also had the benefit of being on a Washington line that had Daron Payne and Jonathan Allen and Chase Young opposite of him for most of it. I know Chase missed a lot of time as well, and Montez Sweat was still effective. But now you're expecting him to be a game changer for Chicago. I do think, however, this offseason, they still have plenty of money. They still have plenty of draft capital, given that they have 2 first-round picks that are figuring to be very high first-round picks. Because you don't think the Panthers are going to make a run here necessarily. The Bears themselves probably won't finish outside the top 5 in draft picks, if we're being completely honest. So you can flip one of those picks at least to maybe acquire more capital. And maybe that's why they were so cavalier with that 2nd-round pick. I have to think because they know that they have some flexibility, because they have so much capital at the top of this draft coming up. That's what kind of gives me a little bit of comfort when it comes to talking about the Chicago Bears and the moves that they're making. Even if they have to take a quarterback with their first-round pick, they're still going to have likely another top 5 pick to play with and move down in the round. You could still end up in the 1st round and pick up another 2nd, something like that, depending on who your trade partner is. So I'm not necessarily worried. They have a lot of assets. They're quietly filling holes as well. Bears signed Andrew Billings, who has been a bright spot on that interior of the defensive line. He's a great nose tackle. And I think that you're cutting down on the amount of needs that you are going to need to fill come this offseason. So I think you have enough capital between the monetary and the draft capital to now go after some experienced offensive linemen in free agency, maybe even pick up another one in the draft. I could see them needing a running back at this point as well. But now you're really just talking about depth on the defensive side of the ball and maybe a 3-tech, because they still kind of are missing that dude. But that can be acquired in free agency, and they're still going to have plenty of money.
Yeah, it's really smart and very well said. And to be fair, it's not exactly as a Packer fan, like I'm super excited about Montez Sweat being in the division either. So those are all, it's always good to be the team that gets the best player out of the trade. And obviously the Bears get Montez Sweat in the trade. I did want to quickly ask you brought him up earlier, Jaylen Johnson, and that entire situation. Yeah. It's an interesting one because he's been one of their best players. Usually you want to keep those type of players around. Jaylen clearly not happy. He gets the opportunity to go seek out a trade. He feels like he's going to get traded. No trade comes to fruition. And now he's just kind of have to left play out the rest of the season, and it has the impending free agency coming up. What's the latest on Jaylen Johnson and how he's kind of feeling in Chicago right now?
Well, Ryan Poles said that he's still open to getting a deal done. And he also, he talked very candidly actually about this whole situation with Jaylen Johnson and how neither side has dug their heels in a specific number. Jaylen Johnson isn't asking for a specific number. The Bears aren't telling him this is their best and final. So the negotiations are still there. And I think there is an element to the fact that he was allowed to seek a trade and that no one did trade for him. So that, that kind of knocks you down a peg, or it gives you a clue as to what the market might be for you as a specific player. I don't think that completely gives Jaylen Johnson necessarily a reality check. Again, we don't know the number he's asking for. He threw out the $30 million number, which probably wasn't the best number to illustrate his point in the press conference. He's not asking for $30 million a year, but at the same time, there is something to be said about being able to hit free agency. And then when teams don't have to trade for you, they don't have to give up assets for you, they just need to sign you to a contract, what that market then looks like. And that's what the Chicago Bears now are going to be up against, and what Jaylen thinks that market is.
Yeah, it's going to be a tough negotiation. It'll be interesting to see how that ultimately plays out. And if he's back in Chicago, he'd be a big player for them to lose if he did go in another direction. But Chicago's going to have the financial means to bring him back if they want to. All the dynamics with that are going to be really fun to kind of keep an eye on as the rest of the season and next season, or the off season, I should say, kind of comes up, I'm sure, faster than it's going to probably seem. It'll be here before you know it. Of course, the Bears had one other big piece of news this week, and that's their running backs coach, David Walker, is released or fired. And it sounds like HR was involved in this situation, which is never, as a former HR professional, it's still nothing that you ever really want to hear. But what happened with the David Walker situation?
It's my understanding that something happened where HR was involved the first time. He was reprimanded and then did whatever that was again. And that was, the final straw. That was hey, we're not playing the 3 strikes, you're out. It's a 1 strike and you're out. And I commend the Chicago Bears for making that move, because I don't think every team in the league would do so. This is a man, though, that has had a reputation in this league. And to hear Matt Eberflus come out and say their culture is outstanding and awesome, to hear Ryan Poles say that they do their due diligence on these guys before they come into the building, I didn't appreciate any of that, because I think that's skirting accountability, because this is not your first offense at this point. You had 2 assistants leave under mysterious circumstances. One was allowed to resign, but let's call it what it was. It was an essential firing of Alan Williams and now David Walker. And it was because of misconduct issues. It wasn't because of performance on the field. It wasn't a scapegoat for things that were going wrong on the field in Chicago. This was misconduct. And again, if I know the reputation of this man going into this, being around the team, I have to think that Matt Eberflus and Ryan Poles did too, and they brought him on anyway. So it's a huge blemish on this administration's record. And I think that if there's any more details that continue to come out about these 2 men that were let go from the Chicago Bears staff, I don't know how Matt Eberflus survives that. Regardless of what's happened on the field, I think that, I think if it was just performance-based, I do think Matt Eberflus would have another year in Chicago. But there is the potential to sit back and say, listen, you can't put a Band-Aid on this. This is 2 very tangible situations where you have brought in guys that do not meet our standard and are making this organization look bad, in addition to just being bad guys. And that's the issue here. And I don't know how you survive that as a head coach, as someone who brought these guys into the building and associated them with the Chicago Bears. So we're going to see how this ends up playing out. Again, if there's more details that emerge with either David Walker or Alan Williams, I expect that to happen. I don't know when, but it's not a good situation. And it's really, especially as a woman in this industry, it's very disheartening to see these guys be brought in and given chances over and over again. Like I said, though, I commend the Bears for doing the right thing and firing David Walker when they had the chance.
Yeah, they're obviously very difficult situations. And we can have the conversation of do people deserve second chances? If you're going to give people second chances, you have to be very careful of who you tether your boat to, because if they go down, they might sink your ship along with it. And that's easily what could happen, and potentially rightfully so, depending on the circumstances with Matt Eberflus here. It's not going great in Chicago on a variety of different levels. At least in Green Bay, at least knock on wood, there's no personnel HR issues that we are currently aware of, which I guess is better than anything else. But it's tough in Chicago, and you hate to see these off-field. I hate off-field stuff in football because football is supposed to be the things that like take your mind off of all the other, off-field drama that does happen in life. And when it kind of bleeds together, it kind of saps all the fun out of it. So I can't believe I'm saying this, but I feel for Chicago Bears fans in that instance, because that's never a fun thing to have to kind of go through.
No. Multiple times in a season at that. I mean, waking up to that, I was like, but I don't think anybody was surprised, to be honest.
Yeah.
So,
let's talk, I guess, unfortunately, about some Green Bay Packers stuff as well. I wanted to get obviously, we've been talking about Rasul Douglas all week and the decision to trade him to Buffalo and what that means for Green Bay, the locker room, the secondary, all those sort of things. But from your vantage point, your thoughts on the Rasul trade heading to Buffalo? Obviously, great fit for Buffalo and Rasul, but how this could affect Green Bay moving forward.
Yeah, I think that's the silver lining of this, right? He's so beloved by people in the locker room, by Green Bay fans, that he gets to go to a contender and have some success, maybe. I was surprised by this, again, not only because he's one of your best players on that defensive side of the ball, but also because he means so much to the locker room, and to in a season where you're still not playing up to expectations on the defensive side of the ball. I don't know why you want to get rid of someone who is, again, it's just an all-around good presence in your locker room, and a leader, and a person that guys go to for advice. All of that stuff matters, and the chemistry off the field matters, as we've well seen across the league at this point, across this division especially. So that was really surprising to me that they were willing to deal him. I understand, though, that they now have, 5 picks in the top 100, which is looking towards the future. So this has to be a sign that Green Bay is kind of waving the white flag in a lot of ways and looking towards the future to see what they can do with all that capital. But I know that Rasul Douglas is going to be missed in that locker room, and he's going to be missed on the field too.
Yeah, I think Brian got a little bit caught yesterday in his press conference, right? Kind of going over like, well, we're focused on winning against the Rams this week. And then Jason Wilde asked him, he's like, well, you're focused on beating the Rams this week. Why trade away Rasul Douglas?
Why trade away Rasul Douglas?
Exactly. So as a GM, and it's part of the job description, is sometimes you're caught between a rock and a hard place in those situations. Right. I do think the general manager's job description is to look at the long-term health of the team and to figure out the way to open up a Super Bowl window. And as soon as you recognize, and very clearly we are to the point of recognizing that there is no Super Bowl window in 2023, and it's probably going to be hard even to open that window in 2024 in the foreseeable future, you have to start taking a look at what you can do to acquire assets that are going to help you in that next window. From that side of things, spreadsheet side of things, GM 101, totally get and understand that. I do think that there needs to be a little bit more reverence for how this affects the current state of the team, not because of what you're trying to accomplish in 2023, but because you need these young players in Green Bay to figure out a way to find success. And when you lose guys like Mercedes Lewis, guys like Rasul Douglas, guys like Randall Cobb, and I'm not saying you just keep players because they're a good locker room presence, but Rasul was a great blend of, hey, he's playing great football and he's a great locker room presence and he's kind of keeping things together in that secondary and on the defense as a whole. Like, there is a intangible value to that as well that has to be considered. And I'm sure Brian considered all of that, but all of a sudden you end up with no leadership in that locker room and a bunch of young players that are struggling through a 4-game losing streak, a 2-5 season. A lot of these players have not been around for the 13-win seasons under Matt LaFleur. The vast majority of these players were acquired last year or this year, which was an 8-9 season, and now a 2-5 season. They're 10-14 in their career for the players who have been here 2 years, or 2-5 if they've just been here for this year. Sometimes it takes some players in that locker room that have gone through some of this, that knows how to make it through to the other end. And I think those are things that, I'm sure we're taking into consideration, but it is a little bit of a tough sell based on where Green Bay is right now.
Yeah, that's my biggest thing, is just the intangible and the presence that he provides, the calming presence from all reports that we've heard, and the way that you see guys interact with him in the locker room after post-game losses, which is most of what I've seen in the Green Bay Packers locker room this year. So I do think that the locker room culture is going to take a hit because of seeing a guy like this shipped off. I mean, you saw all the reactions from the players too. They were just, they seemed gutted and they seemed very affected by it. Because this isn't something, that Brian Gutekunst goes to the locker room and he holds a team meeting and says, hey, by the way, I'm thinking about getting rid of Rasul. Like, what do you guys think? Like, he doesn't, that's not taken into account. Like you said, he's doing things with the future in mind, which is exactly his job. And you got to commend him for doing so. But it's going to make this season that much harder to get through for the Green Bay Packers in that locker room.
And their fans. Somehow we've talked 20 minutes, Carmen, and we have yet to even discuss the biggest news in the NFC North this week, which is that Kirk Cousins tears his Achilles against Green Bay and is out for the remainder of the season, which is a devastating blow for Minnesota, and really should allow Detroit, I think, to just kind of run away with the division from here on out if they weren't already going to. Yeah. They trade for Josh Dobbs. Jaren Hall is going to start this week. What's the state of the Vikings with Kirk Cousins going down for the season?
They are kind of in get through the season mode too now, which is disheartening because of the fact that they were trending upwards with Kirk Cousins. Even though Justin Jefferson was on IR, he was going to be gone. He's gone one more game. Had that not happened with Kirk Cousins on Sunday, he was going to come back to a team that was just as good, if not better, than when he left it. And you were going to have Jordan Addison and Justin Jefferson with the benefit of Kirk Cousins playing some of the best ball of his career as he's been the last couple seasons, on top of the fact that your defense finally seems to understand. We were talking about this last week, Brian Flores' system, and it's really taking hold and it's paying dividends because they are getting takeaways, they are generating pressure, and they are giving the ball back to the offense. Now you're giving it back to the offense with a rookie 5th-round pick on that side, and you feel like the defense has to step up even more. They have to be the ones to score at this point, to take a phrase out of Jair Alexander's vocabulary. But that's what's so disheartening, is that the Vikings, the way they were trending, I don't think it was too far-fetched to say that they could have gotten one of those wild card spots. But at the same time, I don't think that they would have made a deep playoff run though either. So you've got a decision to make. Even with trading for Josh Dobbs, I mean, you traded basically nothing for him. That was a conditional 7th-round pick that could be a 6th, which is what you gave up. I think that this was a holdover to keep Minnesota's options open, and I don't necessarily think that those options don't include Kirk Cousins. I don't know that we've seen the end of Kirk Cousins in Minnesota, especially with the way he was playing, and if he can come back from this injury. Especially at a little bit of a discount because it's on the wrong side of 35, unfortunately. I just feel for Vikings fans because this was, again, a very Vikings thing to happen, where you start trending upward, you're turning your season around, you're finally at 500, and you look like you're going to keep going, and something catastrophic like this happens.
Yeah, I hate to see any team lose any player, but specifically a quarterback. And football is better when you have your best players playing against each other. And you now look across the league in some of the quarterback matchups this week. You're getting Tyson Bagent, you're getting Jaren Hall, you're getting Taylor Heineke, you're getting
Aiden O'Connell.
What's that? Yeah, Aiden O'Connell, Gardner Minshew, it just becomes all of a sudden, instead of seeing exciting players like Anthony Richardson, a really good player in Kirk Cousins, and like some of those, you just end up with Justin Fields is an exciting, whatever you think of Justin Fields, he's exciting to watch and what he can do on any given play. Instead of seeing those players, you're just end up seeing a watered down different version of football, which isn't quite as fun. And that's as a football fan first, that's never fun to see, especially Minnesota too. 2 big awards this past month. Jordan Addison gets Rookie of the Month. Danielle Hunter gets Defensive Player of the Month in the NFC. They were, like you said, they were trending all in the right direction, had every reason to be excited and motivated and confident moving forward. And then they got their literal legs cut out of them, from under them, unfortunately.
Yeah. And I mean, it was just, we don't have to keep beating Vikings fans when they're down. It's an unfortunate situation.
No, we need this in Green Bay right now. I'm just kidding. we need something else to beat down right now. That's why we started with Chicago and then talked about the Vikings. And no, I'm just kidding. But
I see what you're doing here, Andy. I see the thought process.
You see this? Yeah, we didn't want to talk too much about Green Bay today. Nothing's going on in Green Bay. Nothing to see here. Week 8, really quick. Just any cute, big takeaways. Bears completely outclassed by the Chargers. No Tyson Bagent magic this week. Lions beat the Raiders somewhat easily. Obviously, you got the huge Devontae Adams situation, and then Raiders fire everyone too. Vikings beat the Packers. But any NFC North takeaways from week 8?
I mean, I think that with the Bears specifically, I was at the Bears-Chargers game here in LA, and this is what happens, though, when you have a team that's able to kind of prepare for Tyson Bagent and a team that has some really big disruptors on the other side of the ball. Just Chicago got into no sort of rhythm. We're going to see what they can do against New Orleans, but again, that's a good defense, if nothing else, this season, this week. So I mean, not too many takeaways, but we're going to see how it ends up in Chicago, because Justin Fields has now missed multiple games, and there's the question of like, well, why didn't you just put him on IR then? It's an interesting situation there. I think that it's just such a fickle injury in general, but yeah, I mean, the Lions too. I mean, the fact that they kind of struggled in that first half. Didn't break the game open until the second half, but even as poorly as they were technically playing in the first half, they were still able to figure it out, and then eventually just broke the Las Vegas Raiders in general.
in totality, and now they're broken. Jahmyr Gibbs looked awesome in that game as well.
Breakout guy.
Yeah, big time. Really quick, week 9 preview. The Lions have a bye week this week, so they will not be playing. You get the Jaren Hall, Taylor Heineke game, Vikings versus Falcons. You get Tyson Bagent versus Derek Carr and Bears Saints, and then possibly Brett Rippon versus Jordan Love in Packers Rams. What are you looking for in those 3 games this week?
Yeah, I mean, the Minnesota game is going to be very interesting, and probably not in a good way. It's going to be one of those like sicko committee games of like, oh God, I got to watch it. I got no choice in the matter.
Yeah.
But it's going to be interesting to see how much the defense can kind of pick up the pieces in Minnesota, and how much and what they see out of Jaren Hall, because I think that one of those options that Josh Dobbs allows for is for you to see if you have something in Jaren Hall. So will be interesting to see what he can do with a full week of preparation. And they've drafted him for a reason, right? Even if it was in the 5th round. But the Bears Saints, I mean, I don't know that this is going to go much better for the Chicago Bears. It's just, I don't know how much Montez Sweat is going to get into the game. I think that he'll be in the rotation, but I wouldn't expect him to play more than like 20 to 30% of these snaps. But if he can be a little bit productive, just be getting into that rotation and kind of getting into the mix in Chicago, that's going to be very encouraging.
Yeah, I think so too. I think there's like these little storylines that are interesting to keep an eye on. Again, Jaren Hall probably doesn't, amount to much, but still going to be interesting to see what he can do with that Vikings offense that has been working pretty well as of late. Jordan Addison, we just talked about, he's been on a tear. Bears Saints, you get another Tyson Bagent opportunity. You get Montez Sweat in his first game. So at least there's a couple things to kind of keep an eye on there. And then Green Bay versus the Rams and Brett Rippon. I don't even know what to do with that one. Green Bay can Green Bay because I guess the big thing here is, can Green Bay get a win against the Rams if Brett Rippon's the starting quarterback? If you can't at home get a win against Brett Rippon and the Rams, the rest of the season might get very, very bleak, very, very fast for Green Bay. Carmen, you're the absolute best. Thank you so much for doing this every week. Always a joy to talk to you about the state of the NFC North. Where can we find all of your amazing work before you get out of here?
Just go to my social channels. I post everything that I do there, between articles, appearances, all that kind of stuff. So Carmi V on Twitter, X, and Instagram as well.
Follow her again on Twitter at Carmi V. You can follow me at Andy Herman NFL. You can follow the podcast at Pack-A-Day Podcast. That is going to do it for us. But until next time, and as always, go Pack Go.